get the fuck up. Simon says, get the fuck up. Throw your hands in the sky.
All right, moving on to the next one. How important are the quads in the raw squat? I've heard arguments for both sides, being important and not important.
Well, I'll start this question by, I also don't raw squat very much. I would say...
No, but your athletes do.
Yes.
Let's keep that in mind, because when people, I want to get this caveat out of the way, because Nate does predominantly concurrent conjugate type training with all your athletes, all right? But you compete as a multiply powerlifter. Those athletes are not wearing gear, right? So how he's training them is going to be different than how he's training himself. So some of these answers that he may answer will be from two different perspectives.
Right. Right.
The gear and then the raw, but there definitely is a difference.
Right.
Okay.
Good point. I would say it's quads are more important in a raw squat than a geared squat or a box squat. So, like for us, we train primarily off a box. Mm-hmm. But what can happen if you don't do some free squat or some quad work like reverse lunge or TKEs, whatever it may be, you'll start to see knee problems because it's not stimulated enough, mm-hmm. your quad and VMO. So, you know, depending on where you want to go with that, don't, know where your priorities are and work towards those, but don't neglect things for too long. You know what I mean? Like, So like with our kids, we primarily box squat, but we do have to go do some free squat every once in a while or some reverse lunge because you will start to see knee issues. So like if you're a raw squatter, I would say, do maybe some close stance stuff every once in a while, or lunges with a power lifter, probably not too much, but mm-hmm. you get what I'm saying. Don't neglect your quads. If you're going to be a raw squatter, you're going to use them more than if you were a geared or primarily box squatter.
Yeah, I think I'd follow up, or come in from behind on that one and say that you also need to look at the biomechanics of the lift and the technique of the lift and how the lifter does squat.
Right.
If somebody is squatting wide stance and sitting back and they're just hitting parallel, or they're above parallel, or they're below, or just barely below parallel, the quads really aren't going to be that important, but they still are stabilizers. They're still, as you said, need to be trained because of that reason, but it's going to be more of a glute, hamstring, lower back type movement. If the stance comes in, and this can be single ply, and there's some multiply guys too, where if the stance is in more and the knee shifts forward a little bit more, I've seen knees about mid-foot typically for single ply and raw with wraps. Then the quads are going to be more involved. The further that knee comes forward, the more the quads are going to be involved. I've always said you kind of look at it from two extreme perspectives. The sissy squat works the shit out of your quads, right? Yeah. And your knees are going extremely forward. But at the same time, your hips never break parallel. Because as long as the knees keep going forward, the harder it is to break parallel. Right. Okay? On the extreme end, if you're to sit way, way, way back, you're going to fall over backwards, and all the weight's going to go into the glutes. You're not going to be so. Everybody's femur length, everybody's there's Ricky Crane wrote years ago about technique, and then having form, which is going to be your express style based upon biomechanics and levers and so forth, and then there's style. Everybody's got their own little tweak. Some people keep their fucking pinky finger up. I mean, there's all those different things that kind of fall into play. So to answer the question, are the quads important? Every muscle group is important with a squat. It's a total body exercise. So how should it be trained is going to be subjective based upon the strength and the weaknesses of the lifter and how they lift. Currently, I have somebody I'm helping for a meet that's very, very quad dominant. So I pulled the quad work out for the first part of the cycle to bring up the hamstrings and the glutes. And, it's also the knees are in line with the heels. So there's a lot of the force going back with this lifter. Now that we're 4 or 5 weeks out, I'm maintaining the hamstring strength and the glute strength, because how much stronger am I really going to make that over 4 weeks? Right. But I'm bringing back the quads with full force, because that happens to be this lifter's strongest asset. Right. So it'd be stupid to go to the meet without your biggest gun. Right. So that's where you need to focus on weak points, but at the same time understand the strengths, and then how can you pull that into a meet. So to summarize the answer on this is there is no these questions that involve these debates or arguments or whatever it is. There is no. It's like a teeter-totter. The board's never on the ground on either side. It's always fluctuating in the middle, you know, based upon who's speaking and who they're working with at the time, what their experiences are. What I try to tell coaches when they're working with athletes is, I have a bias. Everybody has a bias. My bias is conjugate training, far and large. So if I'm working with a lifter and I'm helping them, I'm gonna, if I have to help with a design or a block or whatever it is, I'm gonna write down what I think it should be, right off the top of my head. Then I'm gonna revisit it maybe a day later, and I'm gonna write it down as my worst critic, understanding my bias. So I ask myself, who thinks conjugate training's fucking worthless? And then what would they write? And then I write what they would write. And then I look at those both and ask myself, what is best for the lifter? And usually the answer's in the middle. Sometimes it's actually on the side of that I don't totally agree with. I can't, and as coaches, I'm not really a coach, but you can't take your bias and put it upon who you're working with, because then you're going to be a terrible coach. You have to do what's best for the athlete. So if there's any take-home message from any of these arguments or debates, I think that's an overriding theme with, if it's box squats, quads, I mean, we can go on and on about a million different debates, is know you're biased, and then know what the opposite of that is, and then develop something, and this is really crazy, most people don't understand this, but develop something called critical thinking. And utilize the critical thinking instead of answering from somebody else's voice through your head and out your fucking mouth. And then that's going to be what's best for the athletes.
I like how you talked about kind of taking the quads out at first and then putting them back in to utilize their strength. That kind of goes back to like our program. You know, what's your priority? Where are you in the year? What's your, you know, what energy system? What traits are you going after? It's that when we program, that's a big thing. Like, what's our priority for where we're at? That's the biggest thing. A lot of people have questions on, you know, well, how do you do conjugate or whatever? Well, the first thing you got to think about is, what's your priority? What are you going after? You know, it doesn't have to just be box squats or just be bands. You know, those are just exercises. The conjugate system is a whole template and system that is really pretty flexible. You know,
extremely, probably more so than anything else.
Yeah, I would agree.